Hi, I'm Laura Miolla from Moxie Life Coach. As a divorce coach and mediator, I help you save big money in your divorce, as well as provide you with the emotional, legal, and financial support you need to make decisions you're proud of in this process. So in this week's episode of What You Don't Know About Divorce Will Cost You, I'm focused on money. And if you remember, I did a previous episode related to the money stories that sabotage you in your divorce. In this episode, I'm actually focused on money strategies in your divorce. There are strategies and best practices that will either help you or hurt you in this process. So here are some of my tips for how to approach, think about, and manage your money in this divorce process. Tip number 1, you gotta let it go. Any of the past hurt, anger, betrayal, resentment, frustration, you gotta let it go. None of that will serve you if you bring that with you to the negotiation table during a divorce process. So let's untangle marriage from divorce. Divorce is the legal dissolution of a marriage contract. It's an impartial transaction. Unfortunately, the lawyers don't care, the judge doesn't care what your stories were, what happened to you. Unless, of course, there's abuse or other egregious behaviors. But in a standard typical divorce, this is really about the division of assets and debt and the allocation of parental responsibilities for children. It's impartial. And again, when you bring your emotions to the table, you start making emotional decisions, which again will not serve you. It's better to understand that your marriage is separate from this divorce process. Separate the two. You need to be coming to the table with values-based decisions and focused on the present moment where you can actually choose what's going to serve you and start creating a plan for building your future vision into this divorce agreement. There are things that you're going to want in the future, so let's think about those and rationally try to negotiate for them now. If you're in an emotional space, you won't be able to do that. So let it go. Let it go. So secondly, and I hate to say this, but unfortunately you're going to accept that you're going to have less. You're going to have less in your life. The lifestyle you are accustomed to is not going to be what it was post-divorce. And for a number of reasons. Number one, your assets are being equalized, meaning that you are going to have less in your IRA, your retirement accounts, your 401k, etc., in your bank accounts. You might be paying child support or spousal support. And you're now going to be living on a single income. It's no longer a double income. That's a hard thing to get used to and process. To then also look at the other perspective, which says, do you really need everything that you used to have? I would argue no. I remember in my own divorce, I was adamant. I was going to keep the house. It was important for me, for my kids to be in the house and to not disrupt their schedules. And I was adamant about that, even though, the lawyers knew. The lawyers knew from the get-go that that was never going to happen. So they just sort of nod their heads. Haha, you'll find out. And it's true, you do. I found out on a very snowy day in New England where I'm by myself in this house with an 8-car driveway, and I now have to shovel it out after a blizzard. And I said, wow, this sucks, I don't want this. And of course, after the winter's gone, here comes the spring, and now I have to mow this massive lawn. It's not a responsibility that I wanted to have. That's not how I wanted my time to get sucked away, and certainly was sucking away what little money I had to be able to maintain the marital home. And it's really funny that everything I was adamant against is what ended up really serving me in the end once I gave it a shot. So you have to accept that your lifestyle will be different. And that doesn't mean it's going to be bad, and it doesn't mean it's going to be worse. It's just going to be different. And it's going to rely on you creating what you want in your life and not necessarily all based on money. All right, so you need to accept that. The third thing I want to talk to you about is the actual divorce negotiation. Whether it's mediation, collaborative divorce, lawyer negotiation through a pro se divorce, litigation. You might think that you're in a good place with your ex, that you've decided how this is going to happen, and you finally get to the negotiation table and you start looking at your financial statements and you start just figuring out, based on what the court is used to seeing, how those assets are going to be divided. And I bet you one of you is not going to be very happy about it. Someone's losing. Actually, everybody loses in divorce, except for lawyers. So be prepared. Money brings out the worst in people. You might think you're heading into an easy divorce and things can flip on a dime. When you see the reality of the situation, when you see what happens with your money, everything can change. But again, you're not defined by money. So this shouldn't have to affect you per se, as long as you're realistic about the fact that there is a cost to divorce. And unfortunately, your lifestyle is changing, so you'll have to get used to that. Another tip here is you need to stop the financial bleeding. And what I mean by that is the longer you are in this divorce negotiation, the more money it will cost you. So it serves you to make this divorce as fast as possible, which means it also serves you to be as prepared as possible beforehand. Before you walk into mediation, before you give documents to your lawyer, if you have your financial statement prepared, if you have these things ready, you will save money, because it means you just have to get through the negotiation piece. Get more clarity up front and stop, throwing money at a lawyer or a mediator because you both can't decide on anything. That will bleed you out financially. Not being prepared, not being organized, and not being able to come to some kind of agreement. If you dig in your heels around things that you think are important but a court doesn't think is important, you're throwing money away. There are realistic expectations, and there are also ones that would be nice to have, but by the time you think you might have it, you've already spent more money than it's worth. It's not worth it. Let it go. And that also comes with not throwing money away in the process. Again, if you come to your attorney with emotional stories, that's time on their clock, and they're going to charge you for it. So you don't want to throw money away because you're wasting time in this process. You don't want to be bled out because you're wasting time in this process. And you want to be able to make clear values-based decisions that serve you in creating the life you want moving forward. And obviously, you're already past, what's happened in your marriage, so you need to move on. Ultimately, money doesn't buy happiness. If you define your value based on money, that leaves you in an empty place. So don't do it. You are more than that. And you have ability to make life what you want it to be. So don't define who you are. Don't define your value based on what money you have. Our society does that. But money doesn't equal happiness. The happiest countries in the world are not the richest. So what do you care more about? Happiness or the money in your bank account? At the end of the day, freedom is priceless. My last tip, which most people never think about, is, your attorney, if you're working with an attorney, is just like any other service provider. Negotiate. Negotiate their rates. They are not gods. They will get you divorced, but you can actually negotiate what they charge you. And you should. Everything in life is a negotiation. This divorce process is a negotiation. Working with a lawyer or anybody else is a negotiation. Ask for what you want. If they say no, fine. At least you asked. Ask for what you want. Don't bleed your money out. Don't give it away. Be very conscious of the fact that you can have the power to save money in this process. So I hope you find it valuable, and I hope you tune into next week's episode of What You Don't Know About Divorce Will Cost You. I have all the tools to get prepared and organized before divorce with checklists, worksheets, exercises in my divorce toolkit, which Moxie members can access on my website. And there's also a bunch of free resources. So use those things to get prepared, get organized, so you're not bleeding out financially. All right, I hope you take this advice. And until next week, speak your truth, even if your voice shakes.